The moment Catherine Whitmore's manicured fingers gripped the armrest of seat 2A, she had no idea she was about to face the most humiliating day of her privileged life. When Ethan Cole, young, black, and unassuming, politely asked for his assigned first-class seat, she dismissed him with a wave. But in exactly 47 minutes, this entitled socialite would discover that the man she'd tried to humiliate owned the entire airline. Friends, stay with me until the end of this incredible story, and comment your city below. I'd love to see how far this tale of justice travels. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at JFK International Airport as Ethan Cole made his way through the terminal, his worn leather messenger bag slung over one shoulder. At 28, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd built an empire from nothing, though you'd never know it from his simple appearance. His dark jeans, plain white t-shirt, and modest sneakers gave no hint that his tech company, NeuralSync Solutions, had just closed a deal that made him one of the youngest billionaires in America. Ethan preferred it this way. The anonymity allowed him to move through the world observing how people truly behaved when they thought no one important was watching. It was a habit he'd developed during his lean startup years, when every interaction taught him something about human nature, market needs, or systemic problems waiting to be solved. He glanced at his boarding pass, Pinnacle Airways Flight 1847, to San Francisco, seat 2A. First class. His assistant had insisted on the upgrade after his marathon of back-to-back meetings in New York. Ethan had resisted at first. He'd spent years flying economy, using the time to work on his laptop, while squeezed into middle seats. But she'd reminded him that self-care wasn't selfish when you're responsible for 8,000 employees. The gate area buzzed with the usual pre-boarding chaos. Business travelers typed furiously on laptops, families corralled restless children, and a group of college students shared earbuds while scrolling through their phones. Ethan found a quiet corner and pulled out his tablet, reviewing the quarterly reports one more time. The numbers were staggering. NeuralSync's AI-driven logistics platform had revolutionized supply chain management for dozens of Fortune 500 companies. But hidden in the portfolio, almost as an afterthought, was his most recent acquisition, a controlling stake in Pinnacle Airways. The airline investment hadn't been about money. It had been personal. 3 years ago, his grandmother had been humiliated on a Pinnacle flight, forced to gate-check her carry-on medication bag despite having a medical exemption. The stress had triggered a panic attack, and she'd spent the flight in distress. When Ethan had tried to file a complaint, he'd been met with corporate indifference and form letter apologies. He'd vowed then that someday, somehow, he'd make sure no one else experienced that dismissive treatment. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now beginning pre-boarding for Pinnacle Airways Flight 1847 with service to San Francisco, the gate agent announced. Ethan waited patiently as passengers requiring special assistance made their way down the jet bridge. He watched an elderly couple help each other with their bags, the husband's hands shaking slightly as he steadied his wife. A young mother juggled a baby and a diaper bag, while her toddler clung to her leg. These were the people airlines should prioritize, Ethan thought, not the ones who simply paid more for a wider seat. We now invite our first-class passengers to board. Ethan joined the short line, nodding politely to the gate agent as she scanned his pass. The jet bridge felt like a transition zone between two worlds, the democratic chaos of the terminal giving way to the hierarchical order of the aircraft. He'd written a paper about it in college, analyzing how airplane cabins represented microcosms of social stratification. His professor had called it brilliant. His mother had called it overthinking. Both were probably right. The aircraft's interior gleamed with that artificial freshness airlines manufactured between flights, a mix of industrial cleaning products and synthetic lavender. First class consisted of 8 seats arranged in 4 rows, each a small throne of leather and privacy. Ethan made his way to row 2, already mentally organizing his work for the 5-hour flight. That's when he saw her. Catherine Whitmore sat in seat 2A, like she'd been born there, her cream-colored designer suit, impeccable despite what must have been hours of travel already. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a style that probably cost more than most people's rent. She was perhaps 55, with the kind of preserved beauty that came from excellent genes and even better dermatologists. A Louis Vuitton bag occupied the seat beside her 2B, while she scrolled through her phone with perfectly manicured nails. Ethan double-checked his boarding pass. Definitely 2A. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely, offering a small smile. "I believe you might be in my seat." Catherine's eyes flicked up from her phone, taking in Ethan with the kind of swift assessment he'd seen 1,000 times before. Young, black, casual clothes. Her mental calculus was almost visible as she categorized him not important. "I don't think so," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of dismissive certainty that came from rarely being contradicted. She returned to her phone. Ethan held out his boarding pass. "I have 2A. See?" Catherine didn't even look at it. "There must be some mistake. I always sit in 2A on this flight. Always." "I'm sure you do, but today this seat was assigned to me." Ethan kept his voice level, professional. He'd learned long ago that the first person to show anger in these situations automatically lost. Catherine finally looked at him properly, her blue eyes narrowing. "Young man, I'm a Platinum Elite member. I've been flying Pinnacle for 20 years. This is my seat." "I understand that, and I respect your loyalty to the airline," Ethan said. "But I have a confirmed reservation for this specific seat. Perhaps there's been a mix-up with your booking." Catherine's laugh was short and sharp. "A mix-up? I don't have mix-ups. My assistant booked this flight weeks ago." A flight attendant approached her, smile professional but strained. Her name tag read, Sarah Lynn. "Is everything all right here?" "No, everything is not all right," Catherine said before Ethan could respond. "This person is claiming my seat." Ethan noticed the pause before person, the way Catherine's mouth twisted slightly, as if she'd swallowed something bitter. He'd heard that pause before, knew what words it replaced. "I have my boarding pass right here," Ethan said to Sarah, holding it out. "Seat 2A. Sarah examined the pass, then looked at Catherine with obvious discomfort. "Ma'am, do you have your boarding pass?" Catherine waved her hand dismissively. "It's on my phone somewhere. But that's not the point. I always sit here. Check your system." Sarah pulled out her tablet, fingers dancing across the screen. Her expression grew more uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitmore, I show you booked in 2C for this flight." "That's impossible," Catherine snapped. "I specifically requested 2A. I always get 2A. "I understand, ma'am, but 2A was already assigned when your reservation was made. You confirmed 2C. Catherine's face flushed. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? My husband is Richard Whitmore, Whitmore Industries. We spend millions on corporate travel with this airline." Sarah's smile faltered. She glanced at Ethan, and he could read the calculation in her eyes, upset one passenger or upset someone who could make corporate complaints. He'd seen this math before, too. "Sir," Sarah said, turning to Ethan with an apologetic look that wasn't quite sincere. "I'm wondering if you might be willing to take another seat. As a gesture of goodwill, I could offer you some compensation, perhaps travel vouchers." Ethan felt the familiar weight of the moment. The easy thing would be to move. Avoid the conflict. Take the vouchers. Don't make a scene. It's what he'd done for years, swallowing small indignities to avoid larger confrontations. But he thought of his grandmother, of that medication bag, of all the people who didn't have the luxury of choosing their battles. "I appreciate the offer," Ethan said calmly, "but I selected this seat for specific reasons. I have work to do on this flight, and I need the outlet access and table space this seat provides. I'm happy to help resolve this situation, but changing seats isn't an option for me." Catherine's eyes flashed. "Are you serious right now? You're going to inconvenience me over an outlet?" "With respect, ma'am, I'm not inconveniencing anyone. I'm sitting in my assigned seat." Other passengers were beginning to board, creating a bottleneck in the aisle. Several had their phones out, that modern instinct to document conflict. Ethan could feel the situation escalating, the energy shifting from annoyance to something uglier. Catherine stood abruptly, her 5'6" frame trying to use every inch to establish dominance. "Listen, I don't know what you think you're doing, but people like me don't get pushed around by people like—" She caught herself, but barely. "People like what?" Ethan asked quietly. The first-class cabin had gone silent. Even the passengers still boarding had stopped, creating a traffic jam of rubberneckers. Catherine's smile was razor-sharp. "People who clearly don't belong in first class. This is obvious, some kind of mistake, probably a computer glitch. Or maybe you used miles to upgrade, but either way, you need to move." "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah intervened weakly, "perhaps we could—" "No," Catherine cut her off. "I'm not moving for him. This is my seat. It's always been my seat. And I'm not giving it up just because someone decided to play dress-up in first class." Ethan felt the familiar burn of anger in his chest, but he'd learned to transform that fire into something more useful. He pulled out his phone and opened an app most people wouldn't recognize, a proprietary interface he'd designed himself. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a new edge, "I've tried to be polite. I've tried to be reasonable. But you seem to be under some misapprehensions about how things work." Catherine laughed. "Oh, this should be good. Are you going to lecture me about fairness, about equality? Save it for someone who cares." "No." Ethan said, his fingers moving across his phone screen. "I'm going to show you something about assumptions." Captain Ramirez appeared in the cabin, his silver hair and weathered face giving him an air of authority. "What seems to be the problem here?" "Captain," Catherine said immediately, her tone shifting to one of practiced manipulation. "This young man is refusing to move from my seat. I fly this route constantly. You know me." Captain Ramirez did indeed recognize her. Ethan could see it in his expression. "Mr. Cole," Ethan supplied. "Mr. Cole, I understand there's been some confusion about seating. In the interest of getting this flight departed on time, would you consider—" "Let me ask you something, Captain," Ethan interrupted. "If I were the one sitting in Mrs. Whitmore's assigned seat, would you be asking her to move, or would you be telling me to get up immediately?" The captain's pause was telling. "That's what I thought," Ethan said. He held up his phone. "I'm going to share something with all of you. This app connects to Pinnacle Airways' corporate system. It's an executive override protocol, available only to senior leadership and—" He paused for effect, "majority shareholders." Catherine scoffed. "Oh, please. You expect us to believe—" Ethan touched his screen. Immediately, every screen in the first-class cabin displayed the same message: "Flight hold initiated. Executive override." Sarah's tablet began pinging frantically. The captain's phone buzzed. Throughout the plane, the entertainment systems all showed the same notification. "What did you do?" Captain Ramirez demanded. "I've placed a ground hold on this flight," Ethan said calmly. It won't be departing until this situation is resolved appropriately. You can't do that, Catherine said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Actually, I can. Ethan pulled up another screen on his phone showing a corporate structure diagram. Neural Sync Solutions, my company acquired a 51% stake in Pinnacle Airways 3 months ago. It was a quiet acquisition handled through various holding companies but entirely legal and binding, which makes me effectively your boss. All of your bosses. The color drained from Catherine's face. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Captain Ramirez took a step back. That's impossible, Catherine stammered. You're lying. Ethan turned his phone toward her. The screen showed his corporate ID complete with his photo and title Ethan Cole, CEO, Neural Sync Solutions. Majority owner, Pinnacle Airways. Now, Ethan continued, his voice never rising above conversational level. We have several options. Option 1, Mrs. Whitmore moves to her assigned seat. I sit in mine, and we all continue with our day. Option 2, Mrs. Whitmore continues to refuse, in which case I'll have her removed from this flight for violating airline policy regarding assigned seating. Option 3. We continue this standoff, the flight remains grounded, and I use the delay to conduct an impromptu review of Pinnacle's discrimination policies and complaint procedures, starting with interviewing every passenger on this plane about their experiences. A young woman in row 3 had her phone up, clearly live streaming. Oh my God, she whispered to her companion. This is going viral already. The hashtag Seatgate is trending. Catherine looked around desperately seeking support, but found only phones pointed in her direction and expressions ranging from shock to satisfaction. Mrs. Whitmore, Captain Ramirez said carefully, I think it would be best if you took your assigned seat. This is outrageous, Catherine hissed. You can't treat me like this. I'll sue. You'll what? Ethan asked. Post about it. Call the media, please do. I'm sure they'd love to hear how you tried to take someone's seat because you thought they didn't belong in first class. I'm sure your husband's corporate board would be fascinated by the publicity. Catherine's hands were shaking now. The transformation from predator to prey had been so swift, so complete, that even Ethan felt a moment of something almost like sympathy. Almost. I particularly enjoyed the people like you comment, Ethan continued. Very subtle, though I'm curious what you meant exactly. People who wear t-shirts. People under 30, or was it something else? I didn't mean yes you did, Ethan said simply. You meant exactly what everyone here knows you meant. And that's the problem, Mrs. Whitmore. Not just with you, but with this entire system. It's designed to make people like you comfortable at the expense of everyone else. To let you believe that your money, your status, your skin color make you more deserving. Well, today you learned something. Sometimes the person you're trying to step on owns the ladder. The cabin was dead silent, except for the sound of phones capturing every word. Sarah, Ethan said, turning to the flight attendant. I'd like to see Pinnacle's discrimination complaint records for the past 5 years. How many were filed? How many were resolved and what actions were taken? Can you have that sent to my phone? Sarah nodded rapidly, her fingers flying across her tablet. Captain Ramirez, after we land, I'd like a meeting with you and your crew about your diversity and inclusion training. That pause when I asked if you'd treat Mrs. Whitmore the same way, that tells me everything I need to know about what needs to change. Yes, sir, the captain said, his military bearing returning. Absolutely. Catherine still stood frozen in the aisle, her designer bag clutched to her chest like armor. Your seat, Mrs. Whitmore, Ethan prompted. She moved mechanically to 2C, her movements, robotic, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. The passengers who had been trapped in the aisle began moving again, many offering Ethan nods of approval or small smiles as they passed. Ethan settled into 2A, pulling out his laptop. But before he could open it, a black woman in her 60s leaned over from across the aisle. "Young man," she said softly, "thank you. My daughter flies for work, and she's dealt with that same attitude more times than I can count. What you just did, it matters." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. It shouldn't have to happen at all. "No," she agreed. "But until it doesn't, we need people like you who won't just take it." As the plane continued boarding, Ethan could hear the whispers, see at the phone still recording, feel the shift in energy. The young woman who'd been live streaming was speaking rapidly to her camera. "Guys, you're not going to believe what just happened. This black CEO just absolutely destroyed this entitled Karen who tried to steal his seat. I'm uploading the full video now." Ethan released the flight hold on his app, and within minutes, Captain Ramirez announced they were preparing for departure. But the damage to Catherine's composure was complete. She sat rigidly in 2C, her phone dark in her lap, her eyes fixed on nothing. As the flight attendants began their safety demonstration, Ethan's phone buzzed with notifications. The live stream had indeed gone viral. #Seatgate was the top trending topic on 3 platforms. His corporate communications team was asking how to respond. Journalists were requesting statements. But the notification that caught his attention was from his grandmother. She'd sent a single emoji, a heart. She'd seen it already. Of course she had. His grandmother might be 78, but she was more connected on social media than most teenagers. She'd probably shared the video with her entire church group by now. The plane pushed back from the gate, and Ethan looked out the window at the tarmac. He thought about all the small indignities, the daily microaggressions, the systemic biases that people faced in spaces like this. He thought about his employees, many of whom had similar stories. He thought about the young black professionals who would board planes tomorrow and face their own Catherine Whitmores. "Sir," Sarah appeared at his side, speaking quietly. "I've sent those reports you requested. Also, the crew wanted me to tell you. We're grateful. We see this behavior all the time, but we're usually powerless to do anything about it." "That's going to change," Ethan said. "Starting today, Pinnacle Airways is implementing a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Any passenger who harasses another based on race, gender, religion, or any other protected characteristic will be permanently banned from our flights." Sarah's eyes widened. "Can you do that?" Ethan smiled. "I own the airline. I can do whatever I want. And what I want is for every passenger to feel safe and respected, whether they're in first class or basic economy." As the plane lifted off, climbing into the New York morning sky, Ethan finally opened his laptop. But he didn't pull up his quarterly reports or his emails. Instead, he opened a new document and began typing an open letter to Pinnacle Airways passengers and staff on change, accountability, and the future of air travel. The words flowed easily, outlining his vision for a different kind of airline. One where dignity wasn't determined by your fare class, where flight crews were empowered to protect passengers from harassment, where corporate success was measured not just in profits, but in how well they served all their customers. Beside him, Catherine Whitmore sat in stony silence, her world having shifted on its axis in the span of 10 minutes. She'd walked onto this plane believing in a natural order, a hierarchy that placed her at the top. She'd leave it knowing that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about such assumptions. Halfway through the flight, Ethan overheard her on a phone call, her voice low and strained. "Richard, we have a problem. A big one. It's all over the internet. The board is going to have questions." He felt no satisfaction in her distress, only a weary recognition of how much work remained. One confrontation, even one that went viral, wouldn't change everything. But it was a start. It was proof that the old ways could be challenged, that power could be used to protect rather than oppress. His phone continued to buzz with notifications. The video had been picked up by major news outlets. Think pieces were already being written. The hashtag had evolved from hashtag Seatgate to hashtag changing the narrative. Celebrities were weighing in. Other airline CEOs were being asked for comment. A message from his head of public relations popped up. "Boss, this is either the best or worst thing that could have happened. How do you want to play it?" Ethan typed back. "Tell the truth, all of it. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow. We're announcing the new policies and a complete overhaul of our corporate culture. And set up a fund, $50 million to start, for organizations fighting discrimination in travel and hospitality. That's going to ruffle feathers with the board." Good. Some feathers need ruffling. As the plane crossed into Midwest airspace, Ethan noticed Catherine had finally pulled out a book. But she wasn't reading it, just staring at the same page. He recognized the look, someone replaying a moment over and over, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. The answer was simple, though she'd probably never understand it. It went wrong the moment she looked at him and saw someone who didn't belong. The moment she decided that her comfort mattered more than his dignity. The moment she believed that the color of her skin and the balance of her bank account gave her the right to take what wasn't hers. These moments happened thousands of times a day, in offices and restaurants, in schools and stores. Usually they passed without consequence, leaving only the bitter aftertaste of injustice. But not today. Today, in this small aluminum tube hurtling through the sky at 500 miles per hour, justice had been served at 35,000 feet. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our initial descent into the San Francisco area. We should be on the ground in about 45 minutes. Ethan saved his document. The open letter was nearly finished. It would be posted on Pinnacle's website the moment they landed, sent to every passenger who'd flown with them in the past year, and released to the media. It would probably cost them some customers, the ones who preferred the old ways, the ones who liked knowing they could buy their way to superiority. But it would gain them others, the ones who'd been waiting for an airline that saw them as human beings first, and revenue sources second. As the plane descended through a layer of clouds, Ethan caught a glimpse of his reflection in the window. He looked tired but determined. This morning he'd been anonymous, just another young black man navigating a world that constantly questioned his right to occupy certain spaces. Tonight he'd be famous or infamous, depending on who you asked. The CEO who'd grounded his own plane to make a point. The billionaire who'd hidden in plain sight to expose discrimination. But more importantly, he'd be the man who'd refused to move. Not from his seat. Not from his principles. Not from the belief that dignity shouldn't be negotiable. The plane touched down smoothly at SFO, and as they taxied to the gate, Ethan could see the unusual activity on the tarmac. News vans were already positioned near the terminal. His head of security had texted that reporters were gathering at the arrival gate. Captain Ramirez's voice came over the intercom one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. Before you deplane, I want to personally apologize to anyone who witnessed the unfortunate incident during boarding. Pinnacle Airways does not tolerate discrimination of any kind, and we're committed to ensuring all our passengers are treated with respect and dignity. Thank you for flying with us." It was corporate speak, carefully worded to avoid legal liability, but Ethan heard something else in the captain's voice, genuine remorse and perhaps a hint of resolve. Change wouldn't come from the top down alone. It needed allies at every level. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, passengers began gathering their belongings. Many paused as they passed Ethan's row, offering quick words of support or gratitude. A teenage girl asked for a selfie. A businessman handed him a card saying his company needed exactly Ethan's kind of leadership. An elderly white woman touched his shoulder gently and said, "Good for you, son." Catherine Whitmore waited until almost everyone had deplaned before standing. As she retrieved her bag from the overhead compartment, she finally looked directly at Ethan. "I suppose you think you've won," she said quietly. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "This isn't about winning or losing, Mrs. Whitmore. It's about changing a system that allows people to be treated as less than human because of how they look or where they come from." "You've ruined me," she continued, her voice brittle. "My reputation, my husband's business relationships, everything." "No," Ethan corrected gently. "You ruined yourself the moment you decided I didn't deserve basic respect. The moment you looked at me and saw people like that instead of just a person. Everything that happens now is a consequence of your own choices." She walked away without another word, her designer heels clicking against the jet bridge with less confidence than they'd carried when she'd boarded. Ethan was the last to leave, taking a moment to thank the crew personally. Sarah looked like she might cry when he handed her his business card and told her to call if she ever experienced retaliation for what happened today. The moment he stepped into the terminal, the cameras started flashing. Reporters shouted questions. His security team materialized around him, creating a buffer, but Ethan held up his hand. "I'll make a brief statement," he said. The crowd quieted immediately. What happened on that plane today wasn't unusual. It was just unusually visible. Every day people face discrimination in ways both subtle and blatant. They're told they don't belong, that they're worth less, that their money isn't as green, or their rights aren't as valid. Today I had the power to push back. But what about all the people who don't? He paused, letting the question hang in the air. Pinnacle Airways is going to be different. We're going to be better. Not because it's good PR or because it's profitable, but because it's right. We're implementing new policies, new training, and new accountability measures. We're going to make flying accessible and dignified for everyone, not just the privileged few. And if we lose customers who can't accept that, then they weren't customers worth keeping. "Mr. Cole," a reporter called out. "Catherine Whitmore's husband has already issued a statement calling your actions a publicity stunt and reverse discrimination. How do you respond?" Ethan almost smiled. "I'd ask Mr. Whitmore to explain how expecting his wife to sit in her assigned seat constitutes discrimination. But more importantly, I'd ask him to consider why his wife felt entitled to take what wasn't hers, simply because she didn't think I deserved it." "What about the flight delay?" another reporter asked. "You held up hundreds of passengers." "The flight was delayed by 12 minutes, Ethan said. "If that's the price of standing up to discrimination, it's a bargain. But you're right, those passengers were inconvenienced by Mrs. Whitmore's refusal to follow basic airline policy. Perhaps she should apologize to them." His phone vibrated with a text from his grandmother. "Watching you on TV, your mother would be so proud." Ethan's mother had passed 5 years ago, just before Neuralsync's breakthrough. She'd never seen his success, never knew that her son would become one of the youngest black billionaires in history. But she'd seen him stand up to bullies on the playground, in the classroom, in the boardroom. She'd taught him that dignity wasn't negotiable, that respect was non-negotiable, that sometimes you had to make noise to create change. "Mr. Cole, what's next?" a young black reporter asked, her eyes bright with something that looked like hope. "What's next is work," Ethan said simply. "Real change doesn't come from viral videos or press conferences. It comes from systematic, deliberate effort to dismantle discriminatory structures and rebuild them with equity at the center. Today was just the beginning. As his security team guided him toward the exit, Ethan felt the weight of what he'd started. By tomorrow, there would be backlash. Conservative media would paint him as a villain, a race baiter, a troublemaker. There would be death threats there always were when a black person stood up too visibly. There would be calls for boycotts, angry shareholders, and probably a few lawsuits. But there would also be something else, hope. The messages were already pouring in from people who'd experienced their own Catherine Whitmores, who'd been told they didn't belong, who'd been forced to swallow injustice because they didn't have the power to fight back. The ride to his San Francisco office was quiet, his driver navigating the familiar streets, while Ethan watched the city pass by. His phone rang constantly, investors, board members, media outlets, friends who'd seen the video. He ignored them all except one. "Grandma," he said, answering on the first ring. "Baby," her voice was warm but stern, "you know I'm proud of you. But you also know this is going to get ugly." "I know. They're going to come for you, try to tear you down, discredit you, destroy what you've built." "I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. "Your mother used to say that the measure of a person isn't in how high they climb, but in how many people they lift up along the way." "I remember." "Then remember this too, you've got the high ground now. Don't let them drag you into the mud. Stay dignified, stay focused, and keep your eyes on what really matters, changing things for the people who can't fight for themselves." After they hung up, Ethan stared out at the San Francisco Bay, thinking about the ripple effects of what had happened. Somewhere, a young black professional would board a plane tomorrow and be treated with a little more respect because of today. Somewhere, an entitled passenger would think twice before assuming they could take what wasn't theirs. Somewhere, a flight attendant would feel empowered to stand up for what was right instead of what was easy. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough, but it was something. His phone buzzed with one final message of the day, this one from an unknown number. "Mr. Cole, I was in row 7 on your flight today. I'm a journalist with the Washington Post. What you might not know is that 3 other passengers came forward after we landed with similar stories about Mrs. Whitmore from previous flights. She has a history of this behavior. Would you like to comment?" Ethan typed back, "This isn't about one person, it's about a system. Focus on that." As his car pulled up to the Neuralsync building, Ethan could see his team gathered in the lobby watching the news coverage on the massive screens he'd installed to track global markets. When he walked in, they erupted in applause. "All right," he said, holding up his hands for quiet. "Enough of that. We've got work to do. Legal team, I want a comprehensive review of all discrimination complaints filed with every major U.S. airline in the past decade. PR team draft. A full policy proposal for Pinnacle. I want it revolutionary but implementable. Tech team, I want an app where passengers can report discrimination in real time with accountability measures built in. Finance team, run the numbers on what this is going to cost us and find the money. We're going to do this right." The room burst into action, his employees energized by having a mission that mattered beyond quarterly profits. As Ethan headed to his office, his assistant intercepted him. "Sir Catherine Whitmore's attorney is on line 1. Richard Whitmore himself is on line 2. And the Secretary of Transportation is on line 3. Ethan smiled grimly. "Tell the Whitmores I'll speak to them after their public apology. And put the secretary through, we have policies to discuss." As he settled behind his desk looking out at the city he'd claimed as his own through hard work and harder fights, Ethan thought about the moment on the plane when Catherine had stood over him, so certain of her superiority. She'd thought she was putting him in his place. Instead, she'd helped him find his voice, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd been told they didn't belong. The sun was setting over San Francisco, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere over the Atlantic, another Pinnacle Airways flight was carrying passengers who had no idea that by tomorrow, their flying experience would begin to change. Somewhere in a boardroom, executives were scrambling to respond to what had happened. Somewhere on social media, millions of people were sharing their own stories of discrimination, finding courage in his example. Ethan pulled up the document he'd started on the plane, his open letter to the world. He added one final paragraph. To those who've been told you don't belong, you do. To those who've been pushed aside, stand firm. To those who've been silenced, speak up. And to those who think they own the world because of how they look or what they have in their bank account, your time is ending. Change is coming, and it's starting at 35,000 feet. He hit send, publishing the letter to Pinnacle's website and his own social media accounts. Within seconds, it was being shared, quoted, and discussed around the world. His computer pinged with an email from Elena Morales, the journalist who'd been covering income inequality and social justice for the New York Times. Her message was brief. Mr. Cole, what you did today matters more than you know. I've been collecting stories about discrimination in travel for years. Would you be willing to look at them? There's a pattern here that goes far beyond one entitled passenger. Ethan wrote back immediately. Send me everything, and let's set up a meeting. If we're going to change this industry, we need to understand exactly what we're fighting. As the last rays of sunlight faded from his office, Ethan allowed himself one moment of satisfaction. He'd won today, not just the seat, not just the confrontation, but something bigger. He'd proven that power could be used for justice, that wealth could be wielded for good, that sometimes one person standing up could inspire millions to do the same. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The Whitmores would fight back. Other airlines would resist change. Critics would emerge from every corner. But tonight, for just this moment, he'd changed the world from seat 2A. And that was just the beginning. The morning after the incident brought a media storm unlike anything Ethan had experienced before. His phone had logged over 3,000 messages by the time he woke at 5:30, and his security team had already intercepted 7 reporters who'd somehow gotten his home address. Through his bedroom window, he could see news vans lined up along the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like modern prayer wheels seeking digital enlightenment. His head of security, Marcus Thompson, a former Navy SEAL who'd been with him since the early days, knocked on his door. Boss, we've got a situation. Richard Whitmore just held a press conference. You're going to want to see this. Ethan pulled on a t-shirt and joined Marcus in his home office where 3 monitors displayed different news feeds. On the center screen, Richard Whitmore stood behind a podium bearing the logo of Whitmore Industries, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression one of practiced indignation. What my wife experienced yesterday was nothing short of a coordinated attack. Richard was saying, his voice carrying the authority of old money and older prejudices. This man, Ethan Cole, orchestrated a publicity stunt at my wife's expense. He bought his way into power and immediately used it to humiliate a loyal customer who's flown with Pinnacle Airways for 2 decades. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Whitmore, the video clearly shows your wife refusing to move from Mr. Cole's assigned seat. How is that a publicity stunt? Richard's jaw tightened. That video was edited to make my wife look bad. Catherine has already explained that there was a misunderstanding about the seating. She thought she was in her correct seat. Instead of handling it quietly professionally, Mr. Cole chose to make a scene to weaponize his newfound power against a defenseless woman. Ethan almost laughed at the word defenseless. Catherine Whitmore had wielded her privilege like a sword for decades, cutting down anyone she deemed unworthy. Furthermore, Richard continued, we're exploring all legal options. This kind of reverse discrimination cannot be allowed to stand. Mr. Cole targeted my wife because she's white, because she's successful, because she represents everything he resents about American excellence. Marcus muted the screen. Want me to get legal on the line? Not yet, Ethan said, already composing his response in his head. Let him dig his hole deeper. The more he talks, the worse they look. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena Morales. Whitmore just handed you a gift. I've found 12 former Pinnacle employees willing to go on record about Catherine's past behavior. She once had a flight attendant fired for serving her coffee in a paper cup instead of china. This goes deep. Ethan's laptop chimed with a video call request from his board of directors. He'd been expecting this. The acquisition of Pinnacle had been controversial within Neuralink, and several board members had opposed it. Now they smelled blood in the water. Gentlemen, ladies, Ethan said, as 8 faces appeared on his screen, each in their own box like a corporate Brady Bunch. Ethan Shaw, Robert Chen, his lead investor, spoke first. We need to discuss the situation. Which situation? Ethan asked mildly. The fact that our airline acquisition is now the most talked about story in America, or that we've gained $17 million in free publicity in the last 18 hours. The situation where you're turning Pinnacle into a social justice experiment, Margaret Wells, CFO of a major investment firm, interjected. We invested in Neuralink for its technology, not for activism. With respect, Margaret, you invested in me, Ethan corrected. And I've delivered 800% returns in 4 years. If you don't trust my judgment now, when exactly would you? This is different, another board member, Thomas Harrison, said. You're making enemies of powerful people. The Whitmores have connections you can't imagine. Political connections. International business connections. They could make things very difficult for us. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Thomas, do you know why I really bought Pinnacle? The board members exchanged glances through their screens. I bought it because airlines are microcosms of society. Every day, millions of people pass through these aluminum tubes, sorted by class, judged by appearance, treated according to their perceived value. If we can change how people are treated at 30,000 feet, we can change how they're treated at ground level. That's very poetic, Margaret said dryly, but poetry doesn't pay dividends. No, but justice does, Ethan countered. Do you know how much airlines lose annually to discrimination lawsuits? How much they spend on crisis management when videos like yesterday's go viral? We're not just doing the right thing. We're doing the smart thing. We're getting ahead of a curve that every other airline will eventually have to follow. His assistant knocked and entered, handing him a tablet. Sir, you need to see this. On the screen was a video that had just been posted to social media. It showed Catherine Whitmore from 3 years ago on a different flight, berating a young Latina flight attendant until the girl was in tears. The person recording could be heard whispering, "This is disgusting. She's treating her like garbage." Send this to the board, Ethan told his assistant, then turned back to his screen. This just surfaced. How many more videos like this do you think are out there? How many former employees have stories? How many passengers have been humiliated? We're not creating a problem. We're exposing one that's existed for decades. Robert Chen cleared his throat. What are you proposing exactly? A complete transformation of how Pinnacle operates. Fair pricing structures that don't gouge working families. Training programs that actually address bias, not just check legal boxes. Technology that tracks discrimination complaints in real time and holds people accountable. And yes, a lifetime ban for passengers who harass others based on race, religion, gender, or any other protected characteristic. That's going to cost $73 million in the first year, Ethan interrupted. I've already run the numbers. We'll make it back in increased customer loyalty, reduced legal costs, and positive publicity within 18 months. The board was quiet for a moment, each member doing their own calculations. I need unanimous support, Ethan said. Not grudging acceptance, but actual support. Because this is happening with or without you. The question is whether you want to be on the right side of history or explaining to your grandchildren why you opposed it. After another long pause, Robert spoke. Take a vote. One by one, the hands went up. Margaret was the last holdout, but eventually she, too, raised her hand. Unanimous, Robert confirmed. God help us, but unanimous. After the call ended, Ethan stood and stretched. Through his window, he could see the crowd of reporters had grown. His neighbors were probably plotting his demise, but he'd deal with that later. Marcus reappeared. Boss, there's something else. Catherine Whitmore is here. Ethan froze. Here at my house. In a car outside. She's been there for 20 minutes working up the courage to come to the door, I think. Want me to send her away? Ethan considered for a moment. No. Bring her in through the garage. Keep the media from seeing her. 10 minutes later, Catherine Whitmore sat in his living room, looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Her designer clothes were impeccable as always, but her face showed cracks in the facade. Without her armor of superiority, she looked smaller, more fragile. Mrs. Whitmore, Ethan said, settling into the chair across from her. This is unexpected. She clutched her purse like a lifeline. I needed to speak with you. Without lawyers. Without cameras. I'm listening. She took a shaky breath. My husband doesn't know I'm here. He'd be furious. He's planning to destroy you, you know. He's already made calls to senators, to regulatory boards, to anyone who might be able to hurt your business. I assumed as much. Doesn't that bother you? Ethan shrugged. I've been fighting uphill my entire life, Mrs. Whitmore. Your husband isn't the first powerful person to try to destroy me. He won't be the last. She studied him for a moment. You really did grow up poor, didn't you? This isn't some story your publicist created. Food stamps and Section 8 housing until I was 14, Ethan confirmed. My mother worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. I got my first computer from a dumpster behind a tech company, spent 6 months fixing it up. That computer changed my life. And now you own an airline. Now I own an airline, he agreed. Funny how life works. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring at her manicured hands. I didn't see you as a person yesterday. I don't know what I saw. A threat, maybe. Someone who didn't belong in my world. And now I see someone who worked harder than I ever have, who built something from nothing while I was born into everything. She looked up, and Ethan was surprised to see tears in her eyes. I've been horrible. Not just yesterday, but for years. Decades. That video of me with the flight attendant. I'd forgotten about it, but seeing it now. Why are you really here, Mrs. Whitmore? She straightened slightly. To apologize. And to warn you. Richard won't stop. He's vindictive and patient. He'll wait years for revenge if he has to. He's already talking about funding primary challenges against politicians who support your reforms, about organizing boycotts, about leveraging international partners to squeeze you out. Again, why are you telling me this? Because, she paused, seeming to struggle with the words. Because yesterday, when I got home, my daughter was waiting for me. She'd seen the video. She's 25, works for a nonprofit that helps immigrant families. She looked at me like I was a stranger. She said she was ashamed to be my daughter. The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of reporters chattering outside. She was right to be ashamed. Catherine continued. I've lived my entire life believing I was better than other people because of who my parents were, who I married, how much money we had. I've treated people like they were beneath me, like their feelings didn't matter. And I taught my children the same poison, though. Thankfully, my daughter seems to have developed immunity. What do you want from me? Ethan asked. Nothing, she said simply. I don't deserve anything from you. But I wanted you to know that not everyone in my world agrees with my husband. Some of us need to change. Need to be better. She stood to leave, then paused. The flight attendant in that video, the one I made cry, I tracked her down this morning. Her name is Maria Santos. I destroyed her career over a paper cup. She never worked in aviation again. I've set up a fund to pay for her to go back to school to pursue whatever dream I killed. That's a start, Ethan said carefully. It's not enough. It will never be enough. But it's what I can do today. She moved toward the door, then turned back. Your mother would be proud of you, Mr. Cole. You've become everything people like me said you couldn't be. After she left, Ethan sat in his living room processing the conversation. Marcus appeared in the doorway. That was unexpected. People can surprise you, Ethan said. Not often, but sometimes. His phone rang. Elena Morales. Ethan, I'm at SFO. 3 airline CEOs just announced they're implementing anti-discrimination policies similar to what you proposed. They're trying to get ahead of the curve. You've started something. Good. Competition makes everyone better. Also, I've been investigating Richard Whitmore. Did you know his company has 17 pending discrimination lawsuits? And that's just what's public. My sources say there are dozens more under NDAs. Ethan wasn't surprised. Men like Richard don't build empires on kindness. I want to write a profile on you. Not just about yesterday, but about everything. Your childhood, your company, your vision for Pinnacle. Will you give me exclusive access? Ethan considered. Elena was one of the few journalists he trusted, someone who'd been writing about inequality long before it was trending. One condition, he said. It's not just about me. It's about the systemic changes we're making. I want you to talk to the flight attendants, the gate agents, the baggage handlers. Tell their stories, too. Deal. Can we start tomorrow? After they hung up, Ethan finally ventured outside to face the media. The reporters surged forward shouting questions, but he held up his hand for silence. I have a brief statement, then I need to get to work. Yesterday's incident has sparked important conversations about discrimination in air travel and beyond. While some have tried to paint this as an attack on successful white Americans, it's actually about ensuring dignity and respect for all Americans regardless of race, class, or background. Mr. Cole, a reporter called out, Richard Whitmore says you orchestrated yesterday's confrontation. How do you respond? I respond with facts. I sat in my assigned seat. Mrs. Whitmore refused to move from it. Everything that followed was a consequence of her choices. If Mr. Whitmore wants to blame someone for his wife's humiliation, he should start with the person who raised her to believe she was entitled to take whatever she wanted. What about accusations of reverse discrimination? Ethan almost smiled. There's no such thing as reverse discrimination. There's just discrimination. And asking someone to sit in their assigned seat isn't discrimination. It's basic airline policy. The fact that Mrs. Whitmore thought she could ignore that policy because of who she is, that's the discrimination we're fighting. He answered a few more questions, then excused himself. He had a company to run and an airline to reform. The drive to Neuralsync's headquarters took him through San Francisco's diverse neighborhoods, from the wealthy enclaves of Pacific Heights to the working-class streets of the Mission District. This city had taught him that proximity didn't equal equality, that you could have millionaires and minimum wage workers on the same block, and they might as well live in different worlds. His office building rose 40 stories into the Bay Area sky, its glass and steel frame a testament to what innovation and determination could build. But Ethan had insisted on ground-floor retail spaces that housed local businesses, including a soul food restaurant run by a woman from his old neighborhood, and a bookstore specializing in works by authors of color. The elevator ride to the executive floor usually gave him time to shift from person to CEO, but today that distinction felt meaningless. Everything he'd built had been personal from the first line of code to yesterday's confrontation at 30,000 feet. His assistant Keisha Williams met him as the elevator doors opened. She'd been with him since the early days, one of the few people who could read his moods and manage his chaos. "Your day is packed," she said, handing him a tablet with his schedule. "Legal wants to discuss the Whitmore situation. PR has 3 different response strategies, and you have a call with the Secretary of Transportation in an hour." "Cancel everything except the Secretary," Ethan said, "and get me the heads of every union that represents Pinnacle employees. If we're going to change things, we need buy-in from the people actually doing the work." Keisha nodded, already typing on her phone. "Also, your grandmother called. She says if you don't call her back in the next hour, she's taking the next flight out here to, quote, remind you who raised you right." Ethan laughed, the first genuine moment of levity he'd felt since yesterday. "I'll call her now." In his office with its panoramic views of the bay, Ethan dialed his grandmother. She answered on the first ring. "About time," she said without preamble. "I've been watching the news. That Whitmore man is saying terrible things about you." "I can handle it, Grandma." "I know you can, baby. But that doesn't mean you should have to. Men like him have been stepping on men like you since before you were born. Difference is, now you've got the power to step back." "I'm trying not to step on anyone," Ethan said. "I'm trying to lift people up. That's why I'm proud of you. But don't be naive. That man isn't going to stop until he's hurt you. You need to be ready." After they talked, Ethan stood at his window looking out at the city. His phone buzzed with updates from his team. The new discrimination reporting app was already in beta testing. 3 senators had issued statements supporting his reforms. Pinnacle's stock had initially dropped, but was now rising as younger investors bought in. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus entered with someone Ethan didn't recognize, a young black woman in a pilot's uniform. "Boss, this is Captain Jasmine Wright. She flies for Pinnacle, heard about what happened, and drove up from LA to talk to you." Captain Wright stepped forward, her bearing military straight. "Mr. Cole, I've been flying commercial aircraft for 12 years. I was one of the first black female captains at Pinnacle. Do you know how many times passengers have refused to believe I'm the pilot? How many times they've asked to speak to the real captain? Too many, I'm guessing." "Every damn week," she said, her professional composure cracking slightly. "What you did yesterday, standing up to that woman, it gave me, and every other pilot of color, hope that things might actually change." "What do you need from me?" Ethan asked. "Support. Real support, not just policies on paper. We need enforcement mechanisms, consequences for discrimination, and backing when we report problems. Too many of us have been told to just ignore it, to not make waves." "Done," Ethan said immediately. "I want you to head up a task force. Pick your team people you trust from every level of operations. You report directly to me, no corporate filters. Whatever you need to make real change happen, you'll get it." Captain Wright's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. Can you start tomorrow?" "I'll start today," she said, shaking his hand firmly. After she left, Ethan turned to Marcus. "What's the security situation looking like?" "Tighter than we'd like. I've identified 3 credible threats so far, all from white supremacist groups who see you as a symbol of what they call white replacement. We're coordinating with FBI, but you need to be careful. Ethan nodded. He'd known this would come. Every time a black person stood up too visibly, the shadows came crawling out with their hatred and violence. His phone rang with the scheduled call from Secretary of Transportation, Patricia Huang. Mr. Cole? Her voice was carefully neutral. You've certainly stirred things up. That was the idea, Madame Secretary. I'm calling to discuss your proposed reforms. Some of them would require regulatory changes at the federal level. I'm aware. That's why I'm prepared to spend whatever it takes on lobbying for those changes. But I'd rather work with you than around you. There was a pause. You're talking about fundamentally changing how airlines operate. The industry won't take this lying down. The industry has discriminated against passengers and employees for decades. They've had their chance to self-regulate. They failed. Richard Whitmore has already been in touch with several members of Congress. He's pushing for an investigation into your acquisition of Pinnacle, suggesting possible antitrust violations. Let him investigate, Ethan said. Everything we did was legal and transparent. Meanwhile, I'll be investigating the 17 discrimination lawsuits against his company. We'll see who comes out cleaner. Secretary Huang sighed. You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Cole. No, I'm changing the rules of a game that's been rigged for too long. After the call, Ethan spent the rest of the day in meetings with his team, crafting the specifics of Pinnacle's transformation. They would start with mandatory bias training for all employees, but not the usual corporate checkbox exercise. Real training developed by experts in racial justice and social psychology. They would implement a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, with clear consequences and no exceptions for valued customers. They would restructure pricing to eliminate predatory fees that disproportionately affected low-income travelers. As the sun set over San Francisco Bay, painting his office in shades of gold, Ethan received a text from an unknown number. The message was simple: check the news. He turned on the wall-mounted television to find Richard Whitmore holding another press conference. But this time, something was different. Behind him stood a group of people Ethan didn't recognize, all wearing matching T-shirts with "Justice for Catherine" printed on them. Today, we announce the formation of the American Excellence Alliance, Richard was saying. An organization dedicated to fighting reverse discrimination and protecting the rights of successful Americans who are being targeted for their achievements. Ethan watched as Richard outlined his planned boycotts of Neuralink products, pressure on companies that partnered with them, and legal challenges to every reform Ethan proposed. This isn't about race, Richard insisted, though everyone could hear the lie in his voice. This is about merit, about maintaining standards, about not letting political correctness destroy American business. The camera panned to the crowd, showing faces twisted with anger and entitlement. These were people who'd never questioned their advantages, never wondered if they'd earned their positions or inherited them. And now, faced with even the smallest challenge to their supremacy, they were ready to war. Ethan's phone buzzed with messages from his team, from reporters, from supporters and detractors. But one message stood out from a number he recognized as Elena Morales. Whitmore just made a mistake. I have 3 former employees of his ready to go on record about racial discrimination at his company. He wants a war. He's got one. Ethan smiled grimly. Richard Whitmore thought this was about power, about money, about maintaining the status quo. He didn't understand that it was about something much simpler and much more powerful: justice. And justice, once awakened, was impossible to stop. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attacks, new attempts to preserve the old order. But tonight, Ethan stood in his office tower looking out at a city that represented everything America claimed to be diverse, innovative, forward-thinking, and everything it actually was, divided, unequal, resistant to change. The battle for Seat 2A had been just the beginning. The war for the soul of American business was just getting started. The war, Richard Whitmore had declared, took its first casualties within 48 hours. Ethan arrived at his office at dawn to find Keisha waiting with a grim expression and a stack of printed emails. 3 major corporate clients have terminated their contracts with NeuralSync, she said without preamble. Whitmore got to them. Combined value of about $80 million annually. Ethan took the papers, scanning through the carefully worded termination notices. Each one cited vague concerns about corporate direction and philosophical alignment, but the real message was clear. Choose sides, and they'd chosen Whitmore's. "Sir, there's more," Marcus said from the doorway. "Someone leaked personal information about 6 of our black employees to a white supremacist website. Home addresses, photos of their kids, everything. We've got security teams on all of them, but 2 have already received death threats." The rage that Ethan had kept carefully controlled since the plane incident threatened to break free. This wasn't just about him anymore. His stand had made targets of innocent people whose only crime was working for him. "Get those families somewhere safe," he ordered. "Hotel security detail, whatever they need. All expenses covered personally by me, not the company." His phone rang, displaying his grandmother's number. He almost didn't answer, not wanting to worry her with this escalation, but knew she'd just keep calling. "Baby, I just saw the news about those contracts," she said immediately. "Don't you dare back down now. Grandma, people are getting threatened because of me." "People have been getting threatened for existing while black long before you came along," she said sharply. "Difference is now they've got someone with power fighting for them. You think Martin Luther King stopped when they threatened his family. You think Harriet Tubman turned around when things got dangerous. I'm not them. No, you're you, and that's enough. Your mother used to say you had a stubborn streak a mile wide. Time to use it." After she hung up, Ethan stood at his window watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, Richard Whitmore was probably having breakfast in his mansion, confident that money and connections would win this fight. He was about to learn otherwise. Elena Morales arrived at 9, accompanied by a camera crew. She'd convinced him that documenting this transformation was crucial, that America needed to see what real change looked like from the inside. "We're going to start with employee interviews," she said, setting up in the conference room. "I want to talk to everyone from janitors to executives, show the full picture of what NeuralSync represents." The first interview was with James Patterson, a white senior developer who'd been with the company for 3 years. Elena expected corporate talking points, but James surprised her. "When I started here, I thought Ethan's diversity initiatives were just PC nonsense," James said, looking directly at the camera. "I'm from rural Alabama, raised to believe certain things about certain people. But working here, seeing how Ethan leads, seeing the brilliance of my black and brown colleagues, it changed me. My kids are growing up different because of what I've learned here." The next interview was with Maria Santos, and Ethan felt his heart stop when he recognized the name. This was the flight attendant Catherine Whitmore had tormented years ago, the one whose career had been destroyed over a paper cup. "How?" he asked Elena during a break. "Catherine Whitmore called me," Elena explained. "Said Maria deserved to have her story heard. So I tracked her down. Turns out, after losing her aviation career, she went into tech. She's been working in your San Francisco office for 6 months. You've probably passed her in the halls." Maria sat in front of the camera with quiet dignity, her dark hair pulled back, her brown eyes steady despite the pain in them. "When I saw the video of Mr. Cole on that plane, I cried," she said softly. For 3 years, I've carried the shame of that day, thinking I must have done something wrong to make that woman so angry. But seeing her do the same thing to him, seeing him fight back, it freed something in me. What do you want people to know? Elena asked gently. That it happens every day in ways big and small. The looks, the assumptions, the dismissals. Mr. Cole standing up wasn't just about one seat on one plane. It was about all of us who've been told we don't belong. The interviews continued throughout the morning. By lunch, Elena had enough material for a documentary, but she wasn't done. She wanted to film Ethan's meeting with the Pinnacle Union representatives. The conference room filled with men and women who kept America's air travel running: pilots, flight attendants, baggage handlers, mechanics. Captain Jasmine Wright had assembled a diverse group, each with their own stories of discrimination, either experienced or witnessed. "I've been handling bags for 15 years, said Deshaun Williams, a muscular black man with graying temples. "You know how many times I've been reported as suspicious just for doing my job? Had cops called on me twice for loading luggage while black. I've had passengers refuse to let me serve them," added Jennifer Park, a Korean-American flight attendant. "They want someone who speaks real English, even though I was born in Ohio." "The company never had our backs," said Roberto Martinez, a Latino gate agent. "They always sided with the customer no matter how abusive. We were told to smile and take it." Ethan listened to story after story, each one a weight added to his resolve. When they finished, he stood facing these people who'd been on the front lines of discrimination for years. "I can't undo the past," he said. "I can't give you back the dignity that was stolen or the opportunities that were denied. But I can promise you this: from now on, Pinnacle Airways will have your back. Any passenger who discriminates against you will be banned. Any supervisor who doesn't support you will be terminated. This isn't just policy, it's personal." "What about the union contract?" asked Captain Wright. "We've been trying to get anti-discrimination protections added for years." "Consider them added. Full protection, full support, and a 20% raise across the board to show we value what you do." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. That kind of raise would cost Pinnacle hundreds of millions, but Ethan had run the numbers. Happy employees meant better service, which meant more customers. It was an investment, not an expense. His phone buzzed with an urgent message from Marcus. "You need to see this, now." In his office, Marcus had the news on. Richard Whitmore was at a podium again, but this time he wasn't alone. Standing beside him were 5 United States senators and a collection of business leaders Ethan recognized as some of America's most conservative power brokers. "We're announcing a congressional investigation into Ethan Cole's acquisition of Pinnacle Airways," Senator Bradley Morrison was saying. "We have concerns about possible foreign influence, hidden investors, and anti-competitive practices." "This is nonsense," Ethan said. "They know our acquisition was completely legal." "It's not about legal," Marcus replied. "It's about tying you up in hearings, making you defend yourself instead of implementing changes. Classic strategy: if you can't win on merit, win on procedure." Richard Whitmore took the microphone. "Furthermore, we're calling on all American businesses to reconsider their relationships with NeuralSync. Mr. Cole has shown that he prioritizes radical social engineering over sound business practices. Is that who you want handling your data, your logistics, your future?" The threats were escalating. This wasn't just about an airline seat anymore. It was about power structures that had existed for generations, now under threat from someone who wasn't supposed to have made it this far. Elena appeared in the doorway. "Ethan, you need to do something big, something that shows you're not backing down. The narrative is shifting, and not in your favor." Ethan thought for a moment, then made a decision that would either save or destroy everything he'd built. "Keisha, call a press conference for this afternoon. Make sure every major outlet is there." "What are you planning?" Elena asked. "Something Richard Whitmore won't expect. I'm going to give away power to gain it." The press conference was held in the atrium of NeuralSync's building, a soaring space filled with natural light and living walls of greenery. By 3 o'clock, it was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious employees watching from the upper floors. Ethan stepped to the podium, no notes, no teleprompter, just him and his truth. "Yesterday, Richard Whitmore and his allies declared war on progress," he began. "They've threatened my employees, pressured my clients, and now they're using the United States Congress as a weapon to maintain their privilege. They think they can bully me into submission. They're wrong." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Effective immediately, I'm restructuring both NeuralSync and Pinnacle Airways. 40% of all profits will go directly to employees through an ownership program. Every person who works for these companies, from the CEO to the janitor, will own a piece of what they're building." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented, a transfer of wealth that would cost Ethan billions. "Furthermore," he continued, "I'm establishing a $100 million legal fund to defend any employee who faces discrimination or retaliation, not just in our companies, but in any American workplace. If you're fired for your race, your religion, your gender, or who you love, we'll make sure you can fight back." "Mr. Cole," a reporter shouted, "aren't you concerned this will tank your stock price?" "I'm concerned about people over profits," Ethan replied. "Always have been, always will be. If investors don't share those values, they're free to sell." "What about the congressional investigation?" "I welcome it. They'll find that everything we've done is legal, ethical, and long overdue. What they won't find is the corruption and discrimination that plague their donors' companies." Another reporter raised her hand. "Richard Whitmore says you're trying to destroy American excellence. How do you respond?" "I respond by asking whose excellence that depends on keeping others down isn't excellence at all. It's oppression with better branding. Real excellence comes from giving everyone a chance to succeed." He was about to continue when Marcus appeared at his side, whispering urgently. Catherine Whitmore had just released a video statement, and it was already going viral. Ethan watched on Marcus's phone as Catherine sat in what looked like her living room, her appearance deliberately modest, her expression remorseful. "I need to tell the truth," she said to the camera. "My husband is wrong. Ethan Cole isn't the enemy. I was. I've spent my life believing I was better than others because of my wealth, my race, my connections. That day on the plane, I showed my worst self, and Mr. Cole simply held up a mirror." She paused, visibly emotional. "Richard is using this situation for his own agenda, but this isn't about politics or power. It's about basic human decency, which I failed to show. Mr. Cole has every right to change Pinnacle Airways. God knows it needs changing. I've been part of the problem for too long." The video ended with Catherine looking directly at the camera. "To my husband and his allies, stop this war. You're on the wrong side of history. To Mr. Cole, I'm sorry. Not just for that day, but for all the days before it, when I had the power to be better and chose not to be." The press conference erupted in chaos, reporters shouting questions about this unexpected development. But Ethan barely heard them. He was thinking about redemption, about second chances, about the possibility that even the most entrenched mindsets could change. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, bringing order back to the room, "Mrs. Whitmore's statement shows something important. This isn't about us versus them. It's about all of us choosing to be better. Change is possible, but only if we're brave enough to admit when we're wrong and committed enough to make it right." His phone buzzed with a text from his grandmother. "Now that's how you fight with grace." But Richard Whitmore wasn't done. Within an hour, he'd released his own statement denouncing his wife as emotionally unstable and manipulated by Cole's propaganda. The cruelty of turning on his own spouse revealed more about his character than any investigation could. As evening fell, Ethan found himself alone in his office, the weight of the day settling on his shoulders. He'd won some battles, but the war was far from over. His phone showed missed calls from investors, partners, politicians, all wanting to know what came next. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Captain Jasmine Wright entered, still in her pilot's uniform. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "What you announced today, the employee ownership, the legal fund, it changes everything. For the first time in my career, I feel like someone has our backs. It's the right thing to do. Maybe, but right doesn't usually win against rich. You're taking huge risks for people you don't even know." Ethan turned to look out at the city lights. "My mother used to clean offices in buildings like this. She'd take me with her sometimes when she couldn't afford a babysitter. I'd sit in these executive suites doing homework while she emptied trash cans and vacuumed carpets. One night, an executive came back for something he'd forgotten. He looked right through her like she didn't exist, like she was part of the furniture." He paused, the memory still sharp after all these years. "I promised myself that night that if I ever had power, I'd use it to make sure no one else felt invisible. Richard Whitmore and his allies want to keep people invisible, keep them in their place. I can't let that happen." Captain Wright nodded. "The pilots are with you. All of us. Whatever comes next, you won't face it alone." After she left, Ethan returned to his desk where a new message waited. It was from Secretary of Transportation, Patricia Huang. "The congressional investigation will begin next week. Be ready. They'll try to destroy you." He smiled grimly. They could try. But Ethan Cole had been fighting longer odds his entire life. He'd survived poverty, racism, and a system designed to exclude him. A bunch of entitled senators and their billionaire puppeteers didn't scare him. His computer chimed with an encrypted message from an anonymous source. Inside was a treasure trove of documents, emails, financial records, and correspondence, showing Richard Whitmore's company engaging in systematic wage theft, discriminatory hiring practices, and illegal union busting. The source identified themselves only as someone who's tired of staying silent. Ethan forwarded everything to Elena Morales and his legal team. If Richard wanted to play dirty, he'd learn that Ethan hadn't gotten where he was by playing nice. As midnight approached, Ethan finally prepared to leave. The building was mostly empty, just security and a few developers pulling all-nighters. But as he reached the lobby, he found a crowd gathered outside. Not reporters this time, but employees. Hundreds of them holding candles and signs that read, "We stand with Ethan," and "Justice at any altitude." Among them were faces of every color, every age, every background. The security guard who'd immigrated from Nigeria, the developer who'd transitioned last year, the accountant who'd been the first in her family to graduate college, the janitor who was putting his kids through school. They were all there, standing in solidarity. "We wanted you to know," one of them called out, "that whatever they throw at you, they're throwing at all of us, and we're not backing down." Ethan stood there, overwhelmed by the support. This was what Richard Whitmore would never understand. Power wasn't about keeping others down. It was about lifting them up. And when you lifted others, they'd stand with you when the storms came. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "All of you. Tomorrow they'll come at us harder. They'll lie, threaten, and try to divide us. But look around. Look at who we are. We're the future they're afraid of, and that future is now." The crowd erupted in cheers, and for a moment, the weight on Ethan's shoulders felt lighter. He wasn't carrying this alone anymore. An army of the unseen, the underestimated, and the undervalued had risen and they were ready to fight. As he finally made his way home, his phone lit up with one final message of the day. It was from Catherine Whitmore. "Richard has locked me out of our accounts and filed for divorce. He says I'm a traitor to my race and class. But for the first time in my life, I feel free. Thank you for showing me who I really was, even if I didn't like what I saw. The person I'm becoming is grateful." Ethan read the message twice, then deleted it. Catherine's redemption was her own journey to make. He had bigger battles ahead. Tomorrow, the congressional hearing would begin. Richard Whitmore and his allies would throw everything they had at him. But tonight, surrounded by the support of people who believed in change, Ethan Cole knew he was ready. The fight for Seat 2A had become a fight for the soul of American business, and he intended to win. The congressional hearing room was a theater of power designed to intimidate with its soaring ceilings, dark wood panels, and elevated platform where senators sat like judges at the end of days. Ethan entered through the main doors at exactly 9 in the morning, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space already packed with reporters, lobbyists, and curious citizens who'd lined up since dawn for a seat at what media outlets were calling the trial of American capitalism. Senator Bradley Morrison, the committee chair, and one of Richard Whitmore's closest allies didn't bother hiding his hostility as Ethan took his seat at the witness table. Morrison's face, weathered by 70 years of privilege masquerading as public service, twisted into what might have been a smile if it hadn't looked so much like a sneer. "Mr. Cole," Morrison began without preamble, his southern drawl stretching the words like taffy. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do," Ethan replied, his voice steady, despite the dozen cameras trained on his face broadcasting this moment to millions. "Let's begin with a simple question," Morrison said, shuffling papers he clearly didn't need to read. "How did a man who grew up on food stamps suddenly acquire enough wealth to buy a controlling stake in a major airline?" The implication hung in the air like poison gas. The poor black kid must have cheated, stolen, or worse, to reach heights reserved for people like Morrison. "Through hard work, innovation, and the same capitalist system you claim to champion, Senator," Ethan responded. "My company, NeuralSync Solutions, developed technology that revolutionized supply chain management. We earned our success by solving problems others couldn't or wouldn't solve. Yet your acquisition of Pinnacle Airways happened through a complex web of holding companies and foreign investors," Senator Patricia Hawthorne interjected. She was younger than Morrison, but cut from the same cloth, her blonde hair and pearl necklace practically screaming old money. Why the secrecy if everything was legitimate? There was no secrecy, Senator. Every transaction was reported to the SEC, every investor vetted according to federal guidelines. The structure was complex because that's how major acquisitions work. I'm happy to walk you through the details, though. I suspect someone who's received significant campaign contributions from airline industry lobbyists already knows this. Hawthorne's face flushed, but before she could respond, Ethan's legal counsel, David Chen, slid a folder across the table. For the record, we're submitting documentation of all campaign contributions received by committee members from airline industry sources. Total amount $12.3 million over the past 6 years. The crowd murmured, and Morrison's gavel cracked like a whip. Order, Mr. Cole, you're here to answer questions, not make accusations. I'm here because Richard Whitmore is using this committee as a weapon in a personal vendetta, Ethan said calmly. And you're letting him because his interests align with yours, keeping power in the hands of those who've always had it. The morning proceeded with a barrage of questions designed to trap, confuse, or anger Ethan into making a mistake. They questioned his education, implying his MIT degree must have been some diversity handout. They questioned his investors, suggesting foreign influence, despite most being American pension funds and investment firms. They questioned his leadership, painting the employee ownership program as a socialist plot rather than capitalism at its finest. Through it all, Ethan remained composed, answering each attack with facts, figures, and a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate his interrogators more than any angry outburst would have. During a recess, Elena Morales approached him in the hallway. "You're doing great, but they're not going to stop. Morrison has 3 more hours of questions prepared." "Let them ask," Ethan said, loosening his tie slightly. "Every question they ask reveals more about them than about me." His phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Check the news. Something's happening at Whitmore Industries." On his phone screen, a breaking news alert showed employees streaming out of Whitmore Industries headquarters, not in evacuation, but in protest. They carried signs reading, "We stand with Catherine," and "End workplace discrimination now." The anonymous source who'd sent Ethan the documents had apparently sent them to the employees too, and they were walking out in solidarity with all the colleagues who'd been underpaid, overlooked, or pushed out because of their race or gender. "Mr. Whitmore's own employees are protesting," Elena said, reading over his shoulder. "This is incredible." When the hearing resumed, there was a different energy in the room. Several senators were checking their phones, whispering urgently with their aides. Morrison called the session back to order, but his confidence had cracked. "Mr. Cole," he began, then paused as an aide handed him a note. His face went pale as he read it. "Senator Morrison," Ethan said, seizing the moment. "While you've been questioning my legitimacy, employees at Whitmore Industries are walking out to protest systematic discrimination. The very man who initiated this investigation is watching his own company crumble because he built it on the exploitation of others. So I have a question for you. Are you investigating me because you genuinely believe I've done something wrong, or because Richard Whitmore is afraid that my success proves his model of business is dying?" "You're out of order," Morrison snapped, but his heart wasn't in it. "No, Senator, I'm exactly in order. You brought me here to defend myself against phantom accusations, while real discrimination, real wage theft, real injustice happens every day in companies run by your donors. You want to talk about un-American. What's un-American is a system that rewards exploitation and punishes innovation. What's un-American is using congressional power to protect the powerful instead of the people." The crowd in the gallery began to applaud, and Morrison's gavel couldn't silence them fast enough. Several senators shifted uncomfortably, aware that the optics had shifted dramatically against them. Senator James Walsh, a younger member from California, who'd been quiet until now, finally spoke. "Mr. Cole, I'd like to ask a different question. What's your vision for American business, not just Pinnacle Airways, but the broader landscape?" Ethan leaned forward, recognizing an unexpected ally. "Senator Walsh, I envision an America where your zip code doesn't determine your future, where a kid from the projects can build a billion-dollar company without being questioned at every turn, where employees own part of what they build, where discrimination is met with consequences, not excuses, where business success is measured not just in profits, but in how many lives are lifted up." "That sounds expensive," Walsh said, though not critically. "Poverty is expensive. Discrimination is expensive. Lost potential is expensive. What I'm proposing is an investment in America's greatest resource, its people. All its people." Before Morrison could regain control, another aide approached with urgent news. Richard Whitmore had just been arrested by federal agents on charges of tax evasion and violation of labor laws. The documents Ethan's anonymous source had provided hadn't just gone to employees and media. They'd gone to the Department of Justice. The hearing fell into chaos. Reporters rushed out to cover the arrest, senators huddled in confused clusters, and Morrison looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. He knew that Whitmore's arrest would trigger investigations into everyone connected to him, including senators who'd taken his money and done his bidding. "This hearing is recessed indefinitely," Morrison announced, his voice barely audible over the noise. As Ethan stood to leave, Senator Walsh approached him. "Mr. Cole, I owe you an apology. I came here today prepared to participate in what I now see was a witch hunt. Your dignity in the face of our shameful behavior has opened my eyes." "Senator, I don't need apologies. I need allies. There are real changes that need to happen, and they'll require legislative support." Walsh nodded. "You'll have it. At least from me." Outside the Capitol, the scene was even more chaotic. News vans surrounded the building. Protesters had gathered in support of Ethan, and somewhere in the distance, Richard Whitmore was being photographed in handcuffs, his empire crumbling in real time. Elena pushed through the crowd to reach Ethan. "I need a statement. The whole country is watching." Ethan climbed onto a concrete barrier so the crowd could see him raising his voice to be heard. "Today we saw what happens when truth meets power. Richard Whitmore thought he could use his wealth and connections to silence me, to stop the changes we're making at Pinnacle Airways and Neuralink. Instead, his own corruption brought him down." He paused, looking at the diverse crowd of supporters. "But this isn't about one man's fall. It's about all of our rise. Every person who's been told they don't belong, every worker who's been exploited, every dream that's been deferred because of discrimination today is your day. We're not just changing airlines or tech companies. We're changing America's fundamental promise from liberty and justice for some to liberty and justice for all." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Ethan felt the weight of the moment. This had started with a dispute over an airline seat and had become a movement that was reshaping American business. His phone rang, showing his grandmother's number. He answered it despite the noise around him. "Baby, I just watched you on TV," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your mother is dancing in heaven right now." "Grandma, it's not over. Whitmore's arrest is just the beginning. His allies will regroup, find new ways to fight. Then you'll find new ways to win. You're a Cole, and Coles don't quit when things get hard." After the call, Marcus guided Ethan to their waiting car, but before they could leave, Catherine Whitmore appeared, having pushed through the crowd. She looked different. Her designer clothes replaced with simple slacks and a blouse, her perfect hair pulled back in a basic ponytail. The armor of privilege had been stripped away, leaving just a woman grappling with her conscience. "Mr. Cole, I need 1 minute," she said. Ethan nodded to Marcus to give them space. "I'm the anonymous source," she said quietly. "I sent you those documents. After what happened on the plane, after seeing Richard's reaction, I finally understood what kind of man I'd married, what kind of life I'd been living." Ethan studied her face, seeing genuine remorse, but also something else, determination. "What will you do now?" he asked. "I'm starting a foundation with the money I'll get from the divorce. It'll provide legal support for employees facing discrimination. I can't undo the harm I've caused, but I can try to prevent others from causing more." "That's a start." "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't mine to give," Ethan interrupted. "It belongs to everyone you've hurt over the years. But redemption, that's something you can earn one action at a time." Catherine nodded, tears threatening to spill. "The flight attendant I humiliated, Maria Santos, I've been meeting with her. She's helping me understand the impact of my behavior. She's shown more grace than I deserve. Maria's like that. She's one of our best developers now. Because you gave her a second chance after I destroyed her first one." "Because she earned it," Ethan corrected. "Just like you'll have to earn yours." As Catherine disappeared back into the crowd, Ethan's phone buzzed with notifications. The walkout at Whitmore Industries had spread to other companies. Workers across the country were demanding the same reforms Ethan had implemented: employee ownership, anti-discrimination policies with teeth, and leadership that valued people over profits. The ride back to Neuralsync's headquarters took them through streets filled with protesters, not angry mobs, but hopeful citizens carrying signs supporting change. Ethan saw families, students, elderly people who'd lived through the civil rights era, and young people born into a world that promised equality but rarely delivered it. At the office, his entire staff had gathered in the atrium. When he walked in, they erupted in applause, but he raised his hand for quiet. "We won today, but the real work starts now. Richard Whitmore is gone, but the system that created him remains. We need to prove that our way works better, that treating people with dignity and respect isn't just morally right, but economically smart." Keisha stepped forward. "The numbers are already proving it. Since you announced the employee ownership program, productivity is up 15%. Since the Pinnacle reforms, customer satisfaction has jumped 20 points. 3 other airlines have announced they're adopting similar policies." "And Neuralsync?" Ethan asked. "We've received over 10,000 job applications in the past week. Top talent from every major tech company wants to work for a place that values them as humans, not just resources." Captain Jasmine Wright appeared on a video screen from Pinnacle's headquarters. "Mr. Cole, I have news. The pilots' union from 5 major airlines has voted to endorse your reforms. They're pressuring their companies to match what you're offering." The dominoes were falling faster than anyone had expected. What had started as one man refusing to give up his seat had become an avalanche of change. That evening, as the sun set over San Francisco Bay, Ethan found himself alone in his office, finally able to process everything that had happened. From his window, he could see planes taking off from SFO, each one carrying hundreds of people to destinations across the globe. Some of those planes bore Pinnacle's logo, now a symbol of something new, something better. Elena knocked and entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I've been thinking about how to end the documentary," she said, sitting across from him. "This story started with such a small moment, a dispute over an airline seat. But it became something so much bigger." "It was always bigger," Ethan said. "That moment on the plane was just the spark. The fuel had been building for generations, every person denied an opportunity, every dream deferred, every injustice swallowed in silence. All it needed was someone to light the match. You could have just moved seats, avoided all of this." Ethan smiled. "My mother used to tell me that the easiest choice and the right choice are rarely the same thing. Moving would have been easy. Standing firm was right." His phone rang with a call from Secretary of Transportation, Patricia Huang. "Mr. Cole, I'm calling to inform you that the FAA is adopting your anti-discrimination protocols as federal guidelines. Every airline operating in American airspace will have to comply." "That's incredible, Madam Secretary." "It's overdue. Your stand woke up a lot of people in Washington. Not everyone, but enough to matter." After the call, Ethan walked through his building, stopping at different floors to talk with employees. The overnight cleaning crew was just arriving, and he made sure to speak with each of them, knowing their names, asking about their families. These were the people his mother had been invisible to most, but essential to everything. "Mr. Cole," one of them, an older Latino man named Carlos, said, "My daughter saw you on TV today. She said you're a hero." "I'm not a hero, Carlos. I'm just someone who got tired of the way things were and decided to do something about it." "That's what heroes do, isn't it?" Back in his office, Ethan found a package waiting on his desk. Inside was his mother's old employee badge from one of her cleaning jobs sent by his grandmother with a note. She kept this to remind herself where she came from. Now it's your turn to remember. He held the worn plastic badge, his mother's young face smiling from a faded photograph. She'd cleaned offices like this one, dreaming of a better life for her son. She'd never imagined he'd own the building change and industry spark a movement. Or maybe she had. Maybe that's why she'd pushed him so hard, demanded so much, believed so deeply. The local news was playing on his office television, showing Richard Whitmore being led into federal custody. The man who'd thought himself untouchable had been brought down by his own cruelty, his own discrimination, his own belief that some people mattered more than others. But Ethan took no joy in Whitmore's fall. It was justice but not celebration. Too many people had been hurt for too long for this to feel like victory. It was simply a necessary step towards something better. His computer chimed with an email from a name he didn't recognize: Tomas Rivera, a baggage handler at a small regional airline in Texas. "Mr. Cole, you don't know me, but I wanted to thank you. I've worked at this airline for 8 years, always being passed over for promotion, always being told I wasn't management material. Today, after seeing what you did, I went to HR and filed a formal complaint. They promoted me on the spot, afraid of becoming the next viral video. You didn't just change your companies, you changed all of them. Thank you for showing us we don't have to accept being treated as less than." Email after email told similar stories. Flight attendants who'd finally reported harassment. Pilots who'd formed diversity committees. Gate agents who'd stood up to discriminatory passengers. The ripples were becoming waves. As midnight approached, Ethan prepared to leave. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison and his allies would regroup, finding subtler ways to fight change. Other Richard Whitmores would emerge, defending their privilege with everything they had. The work was far from over. But tonight, something fundamental had shifted. The old guard had been put on notice. The invisible had become visible. The powerless had found their power. Walking to his car, Ethan passed the spot where his employees had held their candlelight vigil. Someone had left a single candle, still burning, its small flame flickering, but persistent in the darkness. He thought about Catherine Whitmore on that plane, so certain of her superiority, so sure of her place in the world's hierarchy. She'd thought she was taking a seat. Instead, she'd started a revolution. His phone buzzed with one final message of the night from Captain Wright. "Mr. Cole, thought you should know I just flew a full plane from New York to LA. For the first time in my career, not a single passenger questioned whether I belonged in the cockpit. That's because of you." Ethan smiled as he drove through the quiet streets of San Francisco. No, he thought it wasn't because of him. It was because of all of them, everyone who'd stood up, spoken out, refused to accept the unacceptable. The battle for Seat 2A was over, but the war for dignity, respect, and true equality had just begun. And for the first time in American history, it felt like a war they might actually win. 6 months had passed since Richard Whitmore's arrest, and the changes Ethan had initiated were no longer just ripples, but tsunamis reshaping American business. Standing before the United Nations Global Economic Forum in Geneva, Ethan looked out at an audience of world leaders, CEOs, and activists who'd gathered to hear about what media outlets had dubbed the Cole Doctrine, the radical restructuring of capitalism to serve all stakeholders, not just shareholders. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan began, his voice carrying the confidence earned through battle. 6 months ago, a woman tried to take my airline seat because she didn't think I belonged in first class. Today, I'm here to tell you that incident wasn't about a seat, it was about a system that determines human worth by wealth, race, and connections. That system is dying, and I'm here to help bury it. The audience stirred, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably. Among them sat Catherine Whitmore, now a reformed advocate for workers' rights. Her transformation so complete that many still struggled to reconcile the woman she'd been with, who she'd become. Pinnacle Airways now has the highest customer satisfaction rating in the industry. Ethan continued, clicking to a slide showing soaring metrics. NeuralSync's productivity has increased 30% since implementing employee ownership. These aren't anomalies, they're proof that when you treat people with dignity, when you give them a stake in their work, everyone prospers. A hand shot up from the audience. Heinrich Zimmermann, CEO of a major European conglomerate, stood with barely concealed hostility. Mr. Cole, your American experiment is quaint, but surely you don't expect global corporations to restructure based on one airline dispute. No, Mr. Zimmerman, Ethan replied calmly. I expect them to restructure based on survival. The old model extract maximum value while giving minimum compensation is unsustainable. Workers are organizing globally. Consumers are choosing companies that align with their values. Investors are recognizing that environmental, social, and governance factors directly impact long-term profits. Adapt or become extinct. His phone vibrated with an urgent message from Marcus, but Ethan ignored it, focusing on his presentation. He showed slides of other companies that had adopted similar models, their profits growing alongside their social impact. He presented data on reduced turnover, increased innovation, and improved mental health metrics among employees who had ownership stakes. This is socialism disguised as capitalism, someone called out from the back. Ethan smiled. No, this is capitalism finally fulfilling its promise. True capitalism rewards value creation, not value extraction. It encourages competition based on merit, not manipulation. What we've had isn't capitalism, it's oligarchy with better marketing. The session continued for another hour, with Ethan fielding increasingly hostile questions from those who saw him as a threat, and increasingly hopeful ones from those who saw him as a beacon. When it finally ended, Marcus was waiting in the wings, his expression grave. Boss, we have a situation. Senator Morrison committed suicide last night. Left a note confessing to taking bribes from multiple corporations to block labor reforms. The FBI found records going back 20 years. Ethan felt no satisfaction, only a hollow sadness. Morrison had been an enemy, but he'd also been a human being corrupted by a system that rewarded greed over good. Make sure his family has what they need, Ethan said quietly, and no public statements beyond expressing condolences. Catherine approached them, having overheard. Even now, even after everything he did to you, you show grace. Grace isn't weakness, Mrs. Whitmore. It's recognizing that we're all capable of both good and evil, and circumstances often determine which way we fall. She nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that a lot. If I hadn't met you on that plane, if you hadn't stood your ground, I'd still be the person I was. Still be married to Richard. Still be perpetuating harm without even recognizing it. How is the foundation? Ethan asked, changing the subject. We've helped 300 employees file discrimination suits in 6 months. Won most of them. Richard's money is finally doing some good. She paused. He gets out next month, you know. Minimum security sentence reduced for cooperation. I know. Are you worried? No. Richard Whitmore without money and connections is just an angry old man shouting at clouds. His time is over. Their conversation was interrupted by Elena Morales, who'd been documenting the forum for her documentary, now in post-production. Ethan, you need to see this. It's happening right now. She showed him her phone, where a live stream displayed thousands of Amazon warehouse workers walking off the job carrying signs that read, "We want the coal doctrine," and "Employee ownership now." Similar protests were erupting at Walmart, McDonald's, and dozens of other major corporations. This is beyond what we imagined, Elena said. You've started a global labor revolution. Ethan watched the feed, seeing faces of every color, age, and background, united in demanding dignity and fair treatment. His phone rang. It was his grandmother. "Baby, I'm watching the news. All these people standing up because of what you started. Your mother would be so proud." "It's bigger than me now, Grandma. I just lit the match." Sometimes that's all it takes. One person saying no more at the right moment. After the call, Ethan found himself in his hotel room, looking out at Lake Geneva, its surface calm despite the storms raging in boardrooms and government offices around the world. His laptop showed hundreds of emails from CEOs, some threatening legal action, others quietly asking for consultation on implementing reforms before their workers forced them to. A knock at his door revealed Captain Jasmine Wright, who'd flown him to Geneva on a Pinnacle plane. She was holding an iPad with a concerned expression. "Mr. Cole, there's something you should see. Someone leaked video from inside a meeting of what they're calling the Restoration Coalition CEOs and politicians planning to fight your reforms." The video was grainy but clear enough. Around a conference table sat some of America's most powerful people, including several CEOs he recognized and 3 Supreme Court justices who shouldn't have been there at all. "We need to destroy Cole completely," one was saying. "Not just his businesses, but his credibility. Manufacture scandals, plant evidence if necessary. Make him toxic to anyone who might support him." "What about the legal implications?" another asked. "We own enough judges to handle that. The question is how to turn public opinion against him. He's become a folk hero to the working class." "Then we remind them why their betters are in charge," a third voice said. "Economic pressure. Everyone who supports Cole loses their job. Every company that implements his policies faces regulatory harassment. Make the cost of following him higher than the cost of opposing him." The video ended, and Captain Wright looked at Ethan with concern. "This is conspiracy at the highest levels. They're planning to destroy you." "Let them try," Ethan said, but he felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't just Richard Whitmore's personal vendetta anymore. This was institutional power protecting itself. His phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was electronically disguised. "Mr. Cole, I'm calling from inside the Restoration Coalition. Not everyone there agrees with their methods. Some of us believe in competition and innovation, not corruption and intimidation. I'm sending you everything, recordings, documents, financial records. They've been doing this for decades, destroying anyone who threatens their monopolies. Why help me? Because my daughter works for you. She comes home happy for the first time in her career. She owns part of what she's building. She's treated with respect. That's worth more than maintaining a corrupt system." The call ended, and within minutes, Ethan's secure server received an enormous file transfer. It was a treasure trove of criminal activity, bribery, extortion, market manipulation, even murder disguised as accidents when reformers got too close to succeeding. Ethan immediately forwarded everything to Elena, his legal team, and contacts at the Department of Justice. Then he called an emergency video conference with his leadership team. "They're going to come at us with everything," he told them. "This is going to get ugly. Anyone who wants out, now's the time. No judgment, no hard feelings." One by one, his team members responded. Not a single person left. "We're with you, boss," Marcus said, speaking for all of them. "You stood for us. Now we stand for you." The next morning, Ethan gave an unscheduled press conference at the Forum. The room was packed, word having spread that something significant was about to happen. "Last night, I received evidence of a criminal conspiracy among some of America's most powerful people to destroy anyone who threatens their monopolistic practices." He began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. "This conspiracy includes CEOs, politicians, and even members of our judiciary." Gasps rippled through the crowd, as he presented excerpts from the documents, careful to protect his source while exposing the corruption. Several journalists were already typing furiously, their stories updating in real time. They call themselves the Restoration Coalition because they want to restore an America where your worth is determined by your wealth, where your voice only matters if you can afford to buy politicians, where innovation is crushed if it threatens entrenched interests. He paused, looking directly at the cameras. To the members of this coalition watching, I know you're planning to destroy me. You might succeed, but you've already lost. The workers walking out across America aren't doing it for me, they're doing it for themselves, for their families, for a future where work provides dignity, not just survival. You can destroy one man, but you can't destroy an idea whose time has come. The room erupted with questions, but Ethan held up his hand. I have one more announcement. Effective immediately, I'm placing my shares of both Neural Sync and Pinnacle Airways into a trust controlled by the employees. If something happens to me, the companies will belong entirely to the people who build them every day. You can eliminate me, but you can't eliminate them. The shock in the room was palpable. He'd just given away billions of dollars and removed the leverage his enemies might use against him. Catherine Whitmore stood up in the audience. Mr. Cole, I'd like to say something. Ethan nodded, and she made her way to the podium. 6 months ago, I was everything wrong with American capitalism, she said, her voice shaking but determined. I believed wealth made me superior, that privilege was my birthright, that people like Mr. Cole were threats to natural order. I was wrong. The threat isn't people like him, it's people like I was so desperate to maintain advantage that will destroy anyone who suggests everyone deserves opportunity. She turned to face the audience. My ex-husband is getting out of prison soon. He'll want revenge. Others like him will too. But I'll be standing with Mr. Cole and everyone else fighting for change. Not because I deserve forgiveness for my past, but because the future requires all of us to choose sides. I choose the side that sees humanity in everyone, not just the wealthy. The press conference ended in chaos, with reporters rushing to file stories, forum attendees arguing among themselves, and security having to escort Ethan out as tensions rose. Back in his hotel room, Ethan found a handwritten note that had been slipped under his door. You have 24 hours to reverse course or face consequences. This is your only warning. Marcus immediately increased security, but Ethan knew physical protection could only do so much against the kind of power arrayed against him. That evening, something unexpected happened. The President of the United States called. Mr. Cole, I've been following your situation. The evidence you've exposed is forcing my administration to act. We're launching a joint task force between Justice, Treasury, and Commerce to investigate the Restoration Coalition. I need you to know you have the full support of this administration. With respect, Madam President, where was this support when they were destroying other reformers over the years? There was a pause. You're right. We failed them. But we won't fail you. Times are changing partly because of what you've started. Don't stop now. After the call, Ethan stood on his hotel balcony looking out at the Swiss city lights. His phone showed messages of support from around the world, workers, students, even some CEOs who'd been afraid to speak up before. The movement had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. Elena joined him on the balcony. The documentary premieres next week. Early screenings are getting standing ovations. People are calling it the most important film of the decade. It's not about me, Ethan said. It's about all of us. Every person who's ever been told they don't matter, don't belong, don't deserve better. This is their story. Our story, Elena corrected. I was one of those people too before I found my voice through journalism. We all were. A commotion in the street below caught their attention. Hundreds of hotel workers had gathered holding candles and signs supporting Ethan. Word of the death threat had leaked and people were rallying to protect him. Among the crowd, Ethan spotted familiar faces. Maria Santos, the flight attendant, whose career Catherine had destroyed, now thriving as a developer. Deshaun Williams, the baggage handler from Pinnacle, recently promoted to management. Carlos, the janitor from his building, whose daughter had just been accepted to college on a neural sync scholarship. These were the people he'd fought for, and now they were fighting for him. His phone rang. It was Richard Whitmore calling from prison. "Hello, Richard," Ethan said calmly. "You think you've won?" Whitmore's voice was hoarse, aged by months in prison. "You think you've changed everything, but people like me always come back. We always win in the end." "No, Richard, you don't. You just convinced everyone you did. But look around. Your coalition is being investigated. Your allies are abandoning you. Your own employees celebrated when you were arrested. You didn't win. You just delayed losing. I'll destroy you when I get out. When you get out, you'll find a world that's moved on without you. Your ex-wife is funding discrimination lawsuits. Your former employees are running your company with worker ownership. Your political allies are either in prison or pretending they never knew you. You're a relic, Richard. A cautionary tale about what happens when privilege mistakes itself for merit." He hung up, feeling no satisfaction in Whitmore's defeat, only relief that one more barrier to progress had fallen. The next morning brought news that would reshape everything. The Department of Justice, acting on the evidence Ethan had provided, had arrested 17 members of the Restoration Coalition on charges ranging from conspiracy to racketeering. 3 Supreme Court justices announced their resignation rather than face impeachment. Several CEOs fled the country. The system that had seemed invincible was crumbling in real time. Standing before the forum for his final speech, Ethan looked out at an audience that had transformed over the week. The hostility had given way to curiosity, then respect, and finally, for many, inspiration. "A week ago, I told you the old system was dying," he said. "Today, we've seen it collapse under the weight of its own corruption. But this isn't an ending, it's a beginning. The question now isn't whether change will come, but what we'll build in place of what we're tearing down." He clicked to his final slide, showing a vision for corporate structure that balanced profit with purpose, growth, with sustainability, individual success, with collective well-being. "This started with someone trying to take my airline seat. It became a movement to ensure everyone has a seat at the table. Not because it's charitable, but because it's smart. Diversity drives innovation. Inclusion increases productivity. Justice creates stability. These aren't liberal talking points. They're mathematical certainties proven by data." The audience was silent, absorbing his words. "I'm not asking you to be altruistic. I'm asking you to be intelligent. The companies that adapt to this new reality will thrive. Those that don't will join Richard Whitmore in the dustbin of history." As he concluded, the audience rose in a standing ovation, not universal, but overwhelming. Even some who'd come as skeptics were applauding, recognizing that the tide had turned and they could either ride it or be swept away. That evening on the flight back to America, Captain Wright brought Ethan a message from the cockpit. "Mr. Cole, Air Traffic Control has a message for you. They're saying, this can't be right. They're saying every plane in American airspace is thanking you." Ethan made his way to the cockpit, where the radio crackled with voices. "Delta 447 sends regards to Mr. Cole. American 892 thanks Mr. Cole for standing up. Southwest 1205 says Mr. Cole has our support." One after another, pilots were breaking protocol to express solidarity. These were people who'd spent careers following rules, staying silent, accepting the system. Now they were finding their voices. Captain Wright had tears in her eyes. Do you understand what you've done? You've given us permission to be human again, to stand up for what's right instead of just what's profitable. As the plane descended toward San Francisco, Ethan could see the city lights spreading out below, each one representing a life, a dream, a possibility. 6 months ago, he'd just wanted to sit in his assigned seat. Now he'd helped redesign the entire plane. His phone showed a text from his grandmother. Your mother saw this coming. She always said you'd change the world. She just didn't know it would start at 30,000 feet. Ethan smiled, thinking about that moment on Flight 1847 when Catherine Whitmore had tried to take his seat. She'd thought she was asserting dominance. Instead, she'd lit a fuse that exploded decades of accumulated injustice. The plane touched down smoothly, and as Ethan walked through the terminal, he noticed something different. The gate agents, baggage handlers, security guards, they all stood a little straighter, smiled a little broader. They weren't just employees anymore. They were owners, stakeholders, people with dignity and purpose. Outside, Marcus waited with the car, but also with news. Boss Catherine Whitmore is here. Says it's urgent. She was standing by the curb, looking anxious. Mr. Cole Richard's been released early. Some technicality his lawyers found. And he's not alone, he's gathered others, the ones who escaped the arrests. They're planning something. Let them plan, Ethan said. We've already won the only battle that matters, the battle for hearts and minds. You don't understand, Catherine insisted. They're not planning to fight fair. They're planning to... A shot rang out. Ethan felt the impact before he heard the sound, a burning sensation in his shoulder that spun him around. Marcus reacted instantly, covering him while pulling him to safety. Through the chaos and screaming, Ethan saw the shooter, a young white man wearing a Restore America t-shirt, the slogan of Whitmore's remaining supporters. As consciousness faded, Ethan heard Catherine screaming for help, heard sirens approaching, heard Marcus calling his name. But louder than all of that, he heard something else, the voices of hundreds of people who'd been in the terminal surrounding the shooter, holding him for police, refusing to let hatred win. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Maria Santos, the flight attendant, whose life had been changed by a paper cup, kneeling beside him, pressing her jacket against his wound, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "Stay with us, Mr. Cole. The fight's not over. We need you." But even as he slipped into unconsciousness, Ethan knew she was wrong. They didn't need him anymore. The movement had grown beyond any one person. The seed had been planted, watered with struggle, and was now a forest that no amount of violence could burn down. The battle for Seat 2A had become a war for the soul of America, and that war would continue whether he survived or not. But he'd done his part. He'd stood up when it mattered, refused to move when pressed, and shown millions of others that they could do the same. Change, real change, was no longer a dream. It was inevitable.